Greetings and welcome once again to Court in Session. I'm your host, Justice Hype. This isn't the court of law, more like the court of personal observation and objective view, where at any time you or I can be the judge, the jury, plaintiff, or defendant. Hope everyone's staying safe and staying cool, staying hydrated in this extremely hot summer, as these temperatures have been exceedingly hot. Man, so much going on right now during the summer season. But today we bring into the court the police versus the public. Does cash or bail reform help or hinder the community? And as we know, crime has been up across the country. 30% as far as the murder rate increase nationally, and murder within New York City, 3%. So before we go any further, let's get right into Exhibit A. Wow, so much to unpack in that 48-second clip. Where do we begin? First and foremost, I've been saying this for about 2 years, and people think this is a joke or just something to laugh at when I say that you got to watch out for these kids that you see in the middle of the summer wearing black hoodies and ski masks. Like, it's not a direct indication or confirmation of mental health issues being present, obviously, but I think it's a slight indication. It's a hint in that direction. Here in New York, it's been over 90 degrees for days on end. We've had 2 heat waves, and exceedingly hot over the last few years. And when you see someone wearing winter gear in that type of weather, it does kind of lend some indication that mental health issues may be present. And though I may not be a mental health therapist, physician, or a psychologist, a psychiatrist, I think that there's certain things that we can look at and just exercise common sense and see that there's possibly mental health issues at play. But I'll break that down even further in just a few. Here we have allegedly a 16-year-old and another teenager who were approached by the police at a train station in Harlem and asked to leave the train station after being caught trying to jump the turnstile. Now, for those who are not from New York or not familiar with the train stations or subways, the turnstile is the little apparatus used to collect fares and authorize entry into the subway system. And so it's a common thing for youngsters to jump the turnstile to evade or avoid paying for fares. So in this particular case, these 2 teenagers were allegedly approached and asked to leave the station. Now, it is reported that the person that recorded the video said that the cop shoved the teenager, the male teenager that we see engaged, mostly engaged in the brawl initially before this took place. But why I go back into mental health and see that might be a factor playing in this particular situation is this incident took place at 125th Street and Lexington. Now, if you're not familiar with that area, just picture New Jack City back in the 80s, but just put a modern spin on it. That's like Public Enemy's video, like Night of the Living Bassheads, okay, Skid Row settings. That area for quite some time has been known as an area that's like extremely drug infested. There's a lot of K2 heads, dope fiends, you name it, out on 125th and Lexington. So this is why I say that that area produces a lot of people who may be drug addicted or exposed to mental health ailments that are unchecked. And on top of that, we got to factor this. Anyone that is willing and able to rush someone who is visibly armed with a pistol and body armor, once again, it's not a confirmation of mental health issues, but I do feel strongly that it's an indication that something may be wrong, because obviously somebody who's willing to get into any type of physical altercation, as we saw in this video, is someone who has nothing to lose, quite frankly. Someone who is pretty much not afraid of anything, I would think, for the most part. So we have to factor that in as well. Now, if you're one of those people who say the cops are always right or the cops are always wrong, you might just want to just click out of this and not even waste your time listening any further. I have always been someone who has been justifiably critical of the cops and how they interact with the community, how they engage the community, and a lot of the mistreatment of the public that has persisted. And we do have bad cops that need to be rooted out of the system. I was not for defund police, because that was just like the public cutting its nose to spite its face. Why do I say that? Is because we have criminals, we have a criminal element, and we have those who are not of a criminal element. So the only standard of, I wouldn't call it protection, because they're not necessarily in essence protecting the people, but the only line of defense, let's say, legal, especially in a state like New York, where people are unable to bear arms and unable to lawfully protect themselves, the only line of defense is the cops, the police. Okay? And some of us who are extreme on one end of the extreme thought that it was a brilliant idea to completely defund the police and just get rid of the cops. So what happens in situations like this, where we have someone who is willing and able to take on a cop that is armed, someone who allegedly was released weeks prior for having a loaded weapon and a robbery? Okay, which leads us into the other part of our session today, is bail reform and its effects on the community. Now, bail reform was originally designed to combat what was called a two-tier system that allowed people who had money or the rich to be able to acquire bail and get out, whereas people who were on a lower socioeconomic status or level, or what we call the poor classes commonly, would not be able to access bail and oftentimes be sitting for misdemeanor or petty crimes. Well, that sounds fair enough on the outside. Of course, we don't need our system, especially in cities like New York, D.C., Chicago, where the criminal justice system is so overrun, and the case logs are so overrun in these cities that we don't need it clogged up by people that are getting caught for $10 worth of weed, or in this particular case, even jumping a turnstile and trying to evade a subway fare. Like it lends a huge burden to the whole judicial system. And so there was some necessary reform that's needed, but the problem with this is now if we're going to have, which we see in many cases, repeat offenders. I just read an article where there were 10 criminals, particular criminals within New York City, that racked up over 500 arrests due to bail reform. Now, this is a report from a particular news source. Who's to say that's true? That sounds absurd. Sounds completely egregious that our system would allow that to happen. But nonetheless, we do know that there are repeat offenders that are being able to take advantage of this new reform and now be out on the streets, and in many places and in many states where you are unable to defend yourself from these types of criminal elements who have nothing to lose, who are not afraid of the cops, who are not afraid of jail. I think anybody who can look at this subject through practical lenses can see that police reform is definitely necessary, as well as bail reform. We would like to avoid having cases where you have youth offenders such as Khalif Browder held in jail for over 3 years for stealing a backpack and a $3,000 bail. We do not need to expose youth offenders especially to situations that could further erode their mental well-being and physical well-being, and in turn making them more of a nuisance to society and themselves when they re-enter the public spaces, because jail and the criminal justice system in theory is designed to reform and rehabilitate criminals, not just house and hold criminals. We also have a criminal element now that we can identify who are not afraid of cops or afraid of jail or prison, and we have to be able to manage these individuals appropriately. We also have to give judges the ability to authorize bail and withhold bail, and also make sure that they are exercising these authorities properly, and that's where the public comes into hand, as we do select judges through our vote. So a lot must be done. Crime is rising across the country. The murder rate has increased nationally, as is reported, over 30%, and in most major cities over 5%. In New York City, subway crimes have climbed over 50% in the last 2 years. And of course, as we know, that means that the public is in danger. So get in the comment section, tell me what you think. This is a definite hot and relevant topic to our communities, not only here in New York City, but in most major cities across the country. We are dealing with the same type of issue. I urge everyone to stay vigilant, stay aware of your surroundings, know your laws, be able to protect yourself to the best extent of the law. Stay safe, stay blessed. Till next time, this was Court in Session, or is Court in Session podcast. Your host, Justice Hype. Peace and blessings. I'm out.